The morning started just like any other. The sun peeked through the curtains, casting a warm glow over our cozy bedroom. I could hear Betty already up, bustling around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Ron and Nancy. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and pancakes filled the air, a familiar and comforting scent that made our house feel like home. I stretched and yawned, taking a moment to enjoy the peacefulness of the early morning. It was the kind of calm that only happens before the kids wake up and the day begins in earnest. I got out of bed, slipped on my robe, and headed downstairs, drawn by the delicious aroma. Betty was at the stove, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. She looked up and smiled as I walked in. "Good morning, love," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Morning, Betty," I replied, wrapping my arms around her from behind. "Smells amazing as always. What's the occasion?" "No occasion," she said with a laugh. "Just thought I'd make something special for the kids. They love pancakes." I kissed her on the cheek and grabbed a mug of coffee. Well, they're lucky to have such a great mom. I'll go wake them up. I headed upstairs to wake up our little ones. Ron, our 5-year-old, was already awake, playing with his toy cars. He looked up at me with a big grin. "Good morning, Dad. Look at my new racetrack." "Morning, champ," I said, ruffling his hair. "That looks awesome. But guess what? Mom made pancakes for breakfast." "Pancakes?" "Yes," Ron shouted, jumping up and down in excitement. I moved on to Nancy's room. Our 3-year-old daughter was still snuggled under her blankets, her tiny face peeking out. I gently shook her awake. "Time to get up, sleepyhead," I said softly. "Mommy's made pancakes." Nancy's eyes fluttered open, and she gave me a sleepy smile. "Pancakes," she echoed, her voice full of wonder. I scooped her up and carried her downstairs, Ron trailing behind us with his favorite car in hand. When we reached the kitchen, Betty had just finished setting the table. The pancakes were stacked high, with syrup and butter waiting on the side. "Good morning, my little angels," Betty said, giving each of them a kiss on the forehead. "Who's ready for some pancakes?" "I am. I am," Ron shouted, climbing into his chair. Nancy giggled and clapped her hands. "Me too, Mommy." Breakfast was a lively affair, filled with laughter and chatter. Ron talked excitedly about the new game he wanted to play, while Nancy tried to feed her pancake to her stuffed bunny. Betty and I exchanged amused glances, our hearts full of love for our little family. As we finished eating, I glanced at the clock and realized it was time to get ready for work. I kissed Betty goodbye and ruffled the kids' hair. "Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you tonight." "Bye, Dad," Ron called out, his mouth full of pancake. "Bye, Daddy," Nancy echoed, waving her tiny hand. Betty walked me to the door and gave me a lingering kiss. "Have a good day at work, honey. Love you." "Love you too," I replied, smiling at her. "Take care of our little monsters." With one last look at my family, I headed out the door, feeling grateful for the life we had built together. Little did I know that this seemingly perfect morning would soon become a distant memory, a reminder of a time when everything felt right in our world. The day at the office was like any other, filled with meetings, emails, and paperwork. Around lunchtime, a dull headache started to build, making it hard to concentrate. I decided to head home early, hoping some rest would help. I let my boss know and left the office, the headache pounding behind my eyes. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed something strange. The house, usually filled with the sounds of children's laughter and Betty's humming, was unnervingly quiet. A knot of anxiety formed in my stomach as I hurried inside. "Ron, Nancy, Betty?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. To my shock, I found Ron and Nancy in the living room, alone and unsupervised. Ron was playing with his toy cars, while Nancy was coloring on the floor. They looked up when they saw me, their faces lighting up with smiles. "Dad, you're home," Ron exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's Mommy?" Ron shrugged. "She's not here. She leaves us alone sometimes." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean she leaves you alone?" "She goes out," Ron said simply. "She says she'll be back soon." I tried calling Betty on my phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic surged through me. Ron, how often does mommy go out like this? He looked thoughtful for a moment. I dunno, maybe a lot. She says she needs a break. I sank into a chair, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Betty would never leave the kids alone. There had to be an explanation. Okay, let's all stay together. We're going to figure this out. I tried calling Betty again, but there was no answer. The longer I waited, the more worried I became. I decided to take the kids to the police station to report her missing. I couldn't just sit there doing nothing. Come on, kids. We're going to find mommy, I said, trying to sound reassuring. I gathered Ron and Nancy, and we headed towards the door. As we stepped outside, I saw Betty standing on the doorstep. She looked disheveled, her clothes rumpled, and her makeup smeared. Betty, where have you been? The kids were alone, I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and relief. Betty avoided my gaze, looking down at her feet. I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd find out like this, she mumbled. I was stunned into silence, unable to comprehend what was happening. Ron, seemingly unfazed, said, I told you everything would be fine. Mom leaves like this every day. I turned to Betty, desperately hoping for an explanation. Betty, what is going on? Why were the kids alone? Betty sighed heavily and sat down on the steps, her shoulders slumped. I didn't want you to find out this way. Every day when you go to work, I leave the kids alone and go out. Go out? Go out where? I asked, my frustration growing. To the bar, she admitted, her voice breaking. I needed a break. It's hard being at home with the kids all day. I needed to feel like myself again. By dressing up like that and leaving our children alone, I snapped, unable to contain my anger. You knew what I was like when you married me, she said defensively. You found me in that bar. I thought you understood. I thought you changed, Betty. We have children now. You can't just abandon them. I shouted, feeling my world crumble around me. She lowered her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I didn't think it would come to this. I took a deep breath, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Betty, we need to talk about this. But first, let's get inside. We walked back into the house, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I knew this was just the beginning of a very difficult conversation. Once we were inside, the air was thick with tension. The children, sensing the unease, retreated to their room without a word. Betty and I stood in the living room, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Betty, we need to talk about this. What is going on? Why have you been leaving the kids alone? Betty sank into the couch, her face pale and drawn. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. But you did, Betty, I said, my voice cracking. Leaving them alone like that. Anything could have happened. Why did you do it? She buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. I felt trapped. Every day, the same routine, taking care of the kids, doing housework. I felt like I was losing myself. I needed a break, a way to escape. I was stunned. Escape? From what? From us. No, not from you, she said quickly, looking up at me with pleading eyes. From the monotony, from the feeling of being stuck in a role I wasn't ready for. I needed to feel alive again. And you thought going to a bar, leaving our children alone, was the way to do that? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She nodded, wiping her tears away. I know it was wrong. I know I should have found another way. But it was the only thing that made me feel like myself again, even if it was just for a few hours. I sat down across from her, trying to understand. Why didn't you talk to me about it? Why didn't you tell me you were feeling this way? I didn't want to burden you, she said softly. You work so hard to provide for us. I didn't want you to worry about me too. Betty, we're a team, I said, reaching out to take her hand. If you're struggling, we need to face it together. Leaving the kids alone isn't the answer. She squeezed my hand, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I know, I was just so lost. I didn't know what else to do. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. We need to find a solution that works for both of us. Maybe we can get some help with the kids, or you can take some time for yourself in a way that's safe for everyone. She nodded, her grip on my hand tightening. I want to do better. I want to be a good mom and a good wife. I just, I need help. Do you think having sex with men in a cheap bar is the solution to problems? We'll figure it out, I promised, feeling a glimmer of hope. But things have to change, Betty. We can't go on like this. She nodded again, a look of determination on her face. I know. I'll do whatever it takes. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. Betty had already gotten out of bed, and I could hear her in the kitchen. The kids were still asleep, their gentle breathing a comforting reminder of the innocence we needed to protect. I knew today would be hard, but it was necessary. We had to confront the issue head on. I found Betty at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Good morning, she said softly. Good morning, I replied, sitting down across from her. We need to talk, Betty, really talk. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I know. I'm ready. I hesitated for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Betty, I love you, and I know you love the kids. But what you've been doing, it's dangerous. We can't go on like this. I know, she said, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just felt so lost. Lost how? I asked gently. She looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim. Every day feels the same. I wake up, take care of the kids, clean the house, make dinner. It's like I'm living the same day over and over. I needed something different, something that made me feel alive. And going to the bar did that for you? I asked, trying to understand. She nodded. It was the only place where I felt like I could breathe. I know it sounds terrible, but for a few hours, I wasn't just a mom or a wife. I was me. Betty, I get that you need a break. We all do. But leaving the kids alone isn't the way to do it, I said, my voice firm but kind. We need to find a better solution. You're right, she said, tears spilling over her cheeks. I was selfish and reckless. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. I need help. I reached across the table and took her hand. We can get through this, but we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I promise. No more secrets. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Okay, let's start by figuring out how we can make things better. Maybe we can hire a babysitter a few days a week so you can have some time for yourself. That would be a huge help, she said, her eyes lighting up with hope. I want to be a better mom and wife. I just didn't know how to ask for what I needed. We'll figure it out together, I said, smiling at her. But you have to promise me that you'll never leave the kids alone again. I promise, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. I'll never do that again. Just then, Ron and Nancy came padding into the kitchen, their faces still puffy with sleep. Good morning, Mommy, Daddy, Ron said, climbing into my lap. Morning, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. How about we make some pancakes? Yay, pancakes. Nancy squealed, clapping her hands. Betty smiled, wiping away her tears. I'll get started on them right away. As we worked together to make breakfast, I felt a sense of hope. We had a long way to go, but we were taking the first steps toward healing. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were a team again. And that gave me the strength to believe that we could overcome anything as long as we faced it together. The days that followed our confrontation were filled with a tense, uneasy peace. Betty and I were working hard to rebuild our lives, but the trust between us had been deeply shaken. Every time she left the house, I couldn't help but wonder if she was telling the truth. It was a constant battle between wanting to believe her and the nagging doubt that lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I found Betty sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkening sky. I joined her, the cool night air wrapping around us. Hey, I said softly, sitting down next to her. How are you holding up? She sighed, hugging her knees to her chest. I'm trying, but it's hard. I know I've hurt you, and I hate myself for it. We're both hurting, I replied, placing a hand on her back. But we need to be honest with each other if we're going to move forward. She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. I know. I don't know how to make things right. One step at a time, I said. We have to rebuild trust, and that means being open and transparent with each other. No more secrets, no more lies. Betty nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I promise, no more secrets. I want to earn back your trust. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of our situation. I believe you want to change, Betty, but it's going to take time. Trust isn't something we can rebuild overnight. She reached out and took my hand, her grip firm and determined. I'll do whatever it takes. I want our family to be whole again. We sat there in silence for a while, the night sounds of crickets and distant traffic filling the air. It was a small moment of connection, but it gave me hope that we could find our way back to each other. The next morning, I decided to take a day off work to spend time with Betty and the kids. We packed a picnic and headed to the park, hoping a change of scenery would help us reconnect. Ron and Nancy were thrilled, running ahead to the playground as soon as we arrived. Betty and I spread out a blanket under a shady tree, watching the kids play. For a moment, everything felt normal, like it used to be before all the secrets and lies. Look, Daddy, I'm swinging so high. Ron called out, his face beaming with joy. Great job, buddy, I shouted back, smiling. Betty leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. Thank you for this. It means a lot to me. We need this, I said, wrapping my arm around her. It's going to take work, but I'm willing to do it if you are. I am, she said, her voice filled with determination. I want to be better for you and for the kids. As the day went on, we laughed, played, and enjoyed being together as a family. It was a reminder of what we were fighting for, and it strengthened my resolve to make things right. That night, after the kids were asleep, Betty and I sat down to talk about the future. We made a plan to get counseling to help us navigate the challenges ahead. It was a step in the right direction, and it gave us both a sense of purpose. We're going to get through this, I said, looking into her eyes, one day at a time. Together, she replied, squeezing my hand. We can do this. As we held each other, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I believed we could make it. Together, we would rebuild the trust that had been shattered and create a stronger, more resilient family. Our relationship had been on the mend for months. We were communicating better, spending more quality time together, and making efforts to understand each other's needs. It felt like we were finally finding our way back to the love we once shared. One Friday night, after putting Ron and Nancy to bed, I decided to surprise Betty with a date night. I had arranged for my parents to babysit, allowing us a rare evening out. Betty seemed thrilled, her eyes lighting up at the idea of a break from our daily routine. This is a great idea, she said, smiling as she put on her coat. I can't remember the last time we had a date night. I thought it would be good for us, I replied, feeling hopeful. We deserve some time to ourselves. We chose a cozy little restaurant downtown, one we used to frequent before life got so complicated. The evening started off perfectly. We talked, laughed, and reminisced about the old days. It felt like we were reconnecting, rediscovering why we fell in love in the first place. I've missed this, Betty said, her hand resting on mine across the table. Just us, talking and enjoying each other's company. Me too, I agreed, squeezing her hand. It's nice to remember that we can still have fun together. After dinner, we decided to take a walk through the nearby park. The night air was cool and refreshing, and the city lights cast a warm glow over everything. We strolled hand in hand, feeling more connected than we had in a long time. But as we neared a small bar on the corner, Betty's mood shifted. She seemed distracted, her eyes darting toward the entrance. Do you mind if we pop in for a quick drink? She asked, her voice casual, but there was an edge to it that I couldn't quite place. I hesitated, sensing her unease. Sure, if that's what you want. We entered the bar, and I could see the tension in Betty's shoulders. She led us to a corner booth, away from the crowd. We ordered drinks, but the atmosphere had changed. Betty's attention kept drifting toward the bar, where a group of people were laughing and drinking. Is everything okay? I asked, leaning in closer to her. Yeah, I'm fine, she said, forcing a smile. Just thinking. We sipped our drinks in silence, the connection we had felt earlier slowly slipping away. I was about to suggest we leave when Betty suddenly stood up. I need to use the restroom, she said, her voice tight. I'll be right back. I watched her weave through the crowd, a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Minutes passed, and when she didn't return, I started to worry. I got up and headed toward the restrooms, but she wasn't there. My heart pounded as I searched the bar, and then I saw her. Betty was in the corner, wrapped in the arms of a drunken man. He was whispering something in her ear, and she was laughing, but it wasn't the happy, carefree laugh I knew. It was strained, desperate. Betty, my voice breaking. She looked up, her face going pale. Oh no, this isn't what it looks like, she stammered, pulling away from the man. Really? Because it looks like you're in the arms of another man, I said, my voice shaking with hurt and anger. The man, clearly intoxicated, slurred. Hey, buddy, we're just having some fun. No need to get all worked up. Get away from her, I snapped, stepping between them. Betty grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with panic. Let's just go home, she pleaded. Betty, what is going on? I demanded, my heart breaking. Why are you here with him? I wasn't. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I just needed a break. I came in here and ran into him. It was a mistake. A mistake. I echoed, my voice hollow. We were doing so well. Why would you do this? I don't know, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I messed up. I didn't want to hurt you. I took a deep breath, trying to process what I was seeing and hearing. Let's go home, I said quietly, feeling numb. The ride home was silent, the air thick with unspoken words and shattered trust. When we arrived, I couldn't even look at her. How could you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We were finally getting better. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice broken. I don't know why I keep doing this. I need help. Yes, you do, I said, feeling the weight of her actions pressing down on me. But I don't know if I can keep going through this. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind like a bad dream. I knew what I had to do, even though it broke my heart. I needed to protect my children and myself. I packed our bags and prepared to leave for my parents' house. Ron and Nancy were still asleep, their peaceful faces a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. I gently woke them up and explained that we were going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. Why, Daddy? Ron asked, rubbing his eyes. We just need some time away, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's going to be okay. Betty was still asleep when we left. I didn't have the strength to face her, to confront the reality of what our life had become. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of finality. This was it, the end of what we had tried so hard to rebuild. At my parents' house, they welcomed us with open arms. My mom hugged me tightly, sensing the pain behind my brave face. It's going to be all right, sweetheart, she said softly. We're here for you. Thanks, Mom, I whispered, fighting back tears. I just don't know what to do anymore. We'll figure it out together, my dad said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You're not alone in this. That evening, after the kids were asleep, my parents and I sat down to talk. I told them everything, from Betty's struggles to the incident at the bar. They listened without judgment, their concern evident. You did the right thing by bringing the kids here, my mom said gently. They need stability right now. And so you, my dad added. This isn't just about them. You need to take care of yourself too. I know, I said, my voice cracking. I just hoped she would come to her senses, that we could fix things. Sometimes, people need to hit rock bottom before they realize they need help, my mom said. But you can't wait around for that. You have to do what's best for you and the kids. Days turned into weeks, and we settled into a new routine at my parents' house. Ron and Nancy adjusted quickly, enjoying the attention from their grandparents. I tried to focus on work and taking care of the kids, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Betty. I wondered if she would call, if she would try to make things right. One afternoon, I received a call from a mutual friend. I saw Betty at the bar again, she said, her voice filled with concern. She was with another man. My heart sank. Despite everything, I had held on to a sliver of hope that she would realize what she was losing and come back to us. But it was clear that she had chosen a different path. Thanks for letting me know, I said quietly, hanging up the phone. That evening, I sat down with my parents to discuss the situation. She's not coming back, I said, feeling the weight of the words. She's found her happiness elsewhere. My mom reached across the table and took my hand. I'm so sorry, honey. This must be so hard for you. It is, I admitted, my voice trembling. But I have to accept it. I can't keep hoping for something that isn't going to happen. You're doing the right thing, my dad said firmly. You're putting your kids first, and that's what matters. As the days passed, I focused on creating a new life for us. We found a small house nearby, and I began to make it our own. The kids needed stability, and so did I. It was time to move forward, even if it meant leaving the past behind. One evening, as we sat in our new living room, Ron looked up at me and asked, Daddy, will Mommy ever come back? I took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. I don't know, buddy, but we have each other, and that's what's important. Nancy climbed into my lap, her small arms wrapping around my neck. I love you, Daddy, she said softly. I love you too, sweetheart, I replied, hugging her tightly. We're going to be okay. We're a family and we'll always be there for each other. As I looked at my children, I felt a sense of peace. Our journey had been difficult, but it had also brought us closer together. We had faced challenges and heartbreak, but we had come out stronger. And as we moved forward, I knew we would continue to build a new life filled with love, hope, and new beginnings.